Hey, sometimes we get asked about making a lesson for children. Maybe you've been asked to lead a program for some kids at your school or your church, and you want to put together a program, maybe for an hour or even 2 hours, and you're like, how do I do that? Or maybe you're a leader of a mission team that's going to go do some construction or some helping a community recover from a disaster or something. And one of the things they're asking you to do is to do a kind of a VBS style program for like 100 kids. And you're thinking, how do I do that? What do I do? You can go to the bookstore and buy a VBS curriculum, but often it requires a lot of supplies and materials, and there's translation and stuff. So how do you do a really simple Bible program without a lot of supplies? How do you put it together? And so we're going to walk through a really simple way to develop a program for kids, write your own curriculum kind of thing. When I teach internationally, I use a little Bible lesson worksheet that looks a lot like this. I have pictures down the side just so I don't have to translate it. Those pictures will help people remember what the steps are to making a lesson. And I want to go through that with you in this video today. First, we start off with the overall idea, what you want to accomplish. And so we say that that's having a theme. And that's important, that you have a really clear theme for your lesson. It's like one simple phrase or one short sentence that will totally provide the direction for your lesson. This is the most important thing that I want kids to know. I'm going to probably say it 10 or 15 times through the lesson. I'm going to keep pointing to it. Everything in the lesson will hang on this theme. Everything is going to keep pointing back to this. This is the one theme I'm going to drive home again and again through this program. And the one we're going to develop today, the theme we're using is Jesus is the only way to heaven. Jesus is the only way to heaven. So as we develop all the pieces of this lesson, we got to keep that in mind and make sure we keep pointing back to that. The next thing is, I want to have some goals for this lesson. Now, often we skip this step because it seems a little bit like a teacher, but it's really important for you to sit and think, what's really the goal of this lesson? How will I know if it's going to be successful or not? And the goal, hitting the target, really involves two things. One, what do I want kids to know after today's lesson? What do I want them to know? And what do I want them to do? That's my goal. So as they hear the lesson about Jesus being the only way to heaven, I want them to know clearly not only that Jesus is the only way to heaven, but I want them to know, how can I know Jesus? How can I follow him? How can I go to be where he is? And I want to make sure they clearly know that. And what do I want them to do? If they're not a believer, my prayer is that they're going to make that decision to pray and invite Jesus to come into their life. They're going to make that commitment to follow him. If they're already believers, maybe what I want them to do is I want them to go and tell somebody else the good news. That it's that important that people know that Jesus is the only way, that we're going to go and do something about it. We're going to go and tell. So I try to set a goal for both believers and non-believers who might be attending this class. Knowing that goal at the beginning helps me with some really important things I'm going to do during this hour. The next thing is, I've got to decide on a verse. We need a verse with words in it that clearly point back to the theme, words that kids can understand. It's a good verse. It might only be a part of a verse that you want them to really know. And I think of John 14:6, where Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And nobody comes to the Father or to heaven except by me. And so we're going to be teaching that Bible verse. I don't have to decide now how I'm going to teach it. Right now I'm just laying the foundation for the lesson. I'm just choosing the verse now. And then the next thing is, once we have the verse identified, we have to figure out, what Bible story am I going to tell? I'm thinking of the same one where the disciples came to Jesus and just said, where are you going? And how can we go there? And I want to build a story on that desire for them that they had to know how to go where Jesus was going to go, how to go to heaven where he was. Now, I have to expand that story a little bit. I want to include a gospel presentation in there. So we're going to maybe make that story a little bit bigger than it really is in that little chapter. But that's the framework. I don't know exactly how yet, but that's what we're going to do. We're going to tell the story of the disciples asking Jesus, how can we go where you're going? So let's start now building the lesson components. We're going to kind of do it in order just because it's easier to understand that way. But knowing the foundation, this is all stuff we decide before we even start planning the lesson. And then we start with the front door. As kids arrive, what am I going to want them to do? What's the very first thing I can do that begins to point them in the direction we're going to go? Maybe if I were doing a lesson on the way, Jesus is the way to heaven, I'm going to think about a trip, maybe going somewhere. And so as the kids come in, I've arranged the chairs to look like an airplane. So I have 3 chairs on each side, a center aisle, and I'm looking at their pretend ticket, and I'm helping them find their seat, and I'm walking them there like I was the flight attendant, and I'm asking questions. If you could go anywhere in the world, where would you go? What would you want to see? And we talk about a trip, and we get all excited about travel, and then we're right from the beginning getting kids aimed at the theme. Where are we going? What's this big trip you're talking about? And then once most of the kids are there, this thing at the door, it can also be an activity that you do as kids are coming in. It could be a craft or a color page or a game or building something, but it's got to fit your theme. Do something to start fitting the theme. And then once most of the kids are there and you want to officially start, you have to introduce the theme. Do something to introduce the theme. Now, maybe I would start with just, hey, boys and girls, I have this piece of paper, and we're going to talk today about going on a trip. Some of you wanted to go to Paris, and some wanted to go to Africa, and you were thinking of all these cool places. But Jesus talked about going to heaven. And sometimes boys and girls will ask me, how do you go to heaven? So I'll take this piece of paper, and I'll begin to fold it, and then I fold it down like this. And because heaven is where God lives. It's like a house. It's like this kingdom in heaven. This is where God lives. And some kids say, how can I get to heaven? And I fold it and I make an airplane. Can you get to heaven by flying in an airplane? No, you can't get there by flying in an airplane. Heaven is too far. Airplanes can't get there. So then I'll cut off the wings of the airplane. And then I'll say, maybe something more powerful. So then I make this rocket. Could you get to heaven in a rocket? Will that take you to heaven? Yeah, that's not going to take you to heaven at all. In our story today, our lesson today, we're going to find out there's only one way to get to heaven, and that way is through the cross. So I just found a really simple way to keep their attention, to introduce the theme for the day, that Jesus is the only way to heaven. Now, the next thing I want to do is maybe sing a song. Maybe there's a song. Can you think of a song about heaven? Heaven is a wonderful place. You know that song? So maybe there's a song you already know that has heaven as a theme of it. Now, this is not your worship time. Maybe you already had worship time, or you'll have it at a little bit different time. But this is at least one song that clearly points to the theme. And then you can kind of end with that song if you have a couple other songs in there. The next thing is include something that's a total surprise. This could be a special activity, a craft, could be a skit, a puppet show. It could be almost anything, but it's kind of fun and a surprise. And when I do this lesson, I love to have one of my helpers come running in from the back of the room right as the song is ending about heaven, and they've got a suitcase or a little bag packed, and they're like, Pastor Larry, I'm ready to go. I'm ready. I heard you were going to go on a trip today, and I heard you were going to go to heaven, and I packed everything I need to go to heaven. And I'm like, what do you mean you packed? What kind of stuff do you pack for heaven? Boys and girls, do you know what kind of stuff you need to take to heaven? And then we start opening the bag and one by one taking out things that he'll need, like money for a ticket. Do you need money for a ticket to get to heaven? No, heaven is free. You don't need that. I need my medicine. I take medicine every day because I have a little bit of a cold and I have to take this. Do you need medicine in heaven? No, because there's no sickness, no dying. There's no problems like that in heaven at all. You won't need pills. Flashlight. I'm afraid of the dark, and so I need flash. Do you need a flashlight in heaven? No, there's no sun, moon, or stars in heaven because God himself lights up heaven. I'm going to miss my mom and my friends, and so I brought some tissues because I don't know. Are you going to be crying in heaven? No, the Bible says all tears. So you go through a bunch of things, and it's kind of funny as they're pulling out all the stuff. The last thing is a picture of Jesus because I love Jesus so much, and I always want to have a picture of him with me wherever I go. Are you going to need a picture of Jesus in heaven? No, because you're going to see him face to face. You won't need this picture. Heaven is an awesome place because Jesus himself is there. God is in heaven. So we've done something fun. Rather than just me describing all the attributes of heaven, I had a character come in and we had a fun way to discover that together. Now, the next thing you're going to want to do is start to teach that Bible verse that you already decided. How am I going to teach that verse in a way that's kind of fun for them? So I think as we're traveling, as we're getting ready to go on this journey, we're thinking of maybe this suitcase, and so I'm using that idea of a little suitcase, and I have all these cards with different pieces of clothing on them. And on each piece of clothing, I'm going to write one of the words for the verse, and I'm going to clothespin them all to a clothesline. And the clothes are being ready to be packed. And so they all have the words on it, and we read the verse down the line. And then as we finish reading, then I'll take down one of the pieces of clothes or have one of the kids come up and take off one of the word cards and put it in a suitcase. And now there's a word missing. Can you still say the verse? We read it together and see if they know. We keep taking keep taking clothes off the clothesline, packing them away until there's none left. And they can all say the Bible verse. So it was a fun way to kind of use the going on a trip picture and teach the Bible verse at the same time. Now it comes time for actually teaching the Bible verse. Or the Bible story. How am I going to do that? Is there a fun way that I can teach the Bible story? So there's lots of ways to present the gospel. So I start out telling the story. Maybe I'll have characters come in and act it out. Maybe it's a puppet skit. In this instant, I'll tell the story of Jesus using some different color envelopes. And I begin to tell how Jesus came to earth. And I'll tell the whole gospel story. And what he did was die on the cross for us. And he came alive again and went to heaven to make a place ready for us so we can be there. So I have these special 5-color props that I use. But again, I'm talking about how to get to heaven where Jesus is. And you find some creative way to actually tell the Bible story. The next component is have them respond to the Bible story. Let's pray together, and let's pray that lesson will be really near to our hearts. At this point, you may want to give some kids who've never made that decision the chance to pray and ask Jesus to come into their life. Maybe you'll also pray for those kids who already know Jesus, and they're thinking of someone that they can tell the story of Jesus to. And so there's a prayer time, at least one prayer time there. You may have had others spread throughout the lesson, but a time to pray with them. Then the next thing is I want to check to see if they know what we taught. I need to check for understanding, because how do I know that they really heard the lesson, that they really got it? I've got to do some things to evaluate to see if they really learned the lesson. Usually that's a review game. We love to play Oh No. And there's a bag, and it's got different cards in it. Each one have point value. We put it inside, and then there's a couple of cards that have a big X on it. We put those inside too. And then we mix them all up, and then I'll ask the boys a question from the lesson. Can you remember what John 14:6 says? And I know it is. If they say it right, they get to come in and pull out points. And if they get points, they get to keep them for their team. But if they pick out X, they lost those points, and they don't get to continue. So go back and forth with a simple review game. It could be anything you want, but we want to check for understanding. We want to see if they really know the lesson, what we've taught them. Sometimes a craft will help you do that. Some kind of activity, a page that they're trying to find the key words in a word search or something. But you're checking for understanding to make sure they really get it. You're also using this as a time to clarify. If they give a wrong answer, something they didn't quite understand, you're correcting that. So you're checking for understanding, and now you're deciding, you're going to give them the other part of the application is, what are you going to do now? So this week, boys and girls, as you go out this week, I want you to remember what you did today. Remember the commitment you made to Jesus today. And every day I want you to talk to Jesus and thank him for coming and dying on the cross and for living for you and for leading you and keeping you safe. So I'm giving them something to do. And for you who already know Jesus, I want you to remember that person you prayed for. Look for an opportunity this week to tell them about Jesus. Next week, I'm going to ask you how you're doing. How did that go when you talked to them? I'm giving them some assignment. There's some application from the lesson, something in their own heart, something they can do during the week, an application. And then the last thing is we want to pray for them as they go. So another opportunity to pray. That's all the components you need for a good Bible lesson, for a program. Now, if you take your time and you do this well, this is an hour's worth of program already. You may want to do that all in one setting, all together. You may want to decide to separate the age groups, maybe the 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds all together in one group, and the 7, 8, 9, 10s together in a group, and the 11, 12, 13, 14 kids in another group. And maybe there's 3 stations. Maybe you have a little activity section where they're getting a little craft to do, maybe a place where they're getting a snack. There's some bigger activity place where they're actually running and doing relay races, saying the Bible verse as they run down and do this relay game. There's some activity, something really much more active for them to do. And the third one is like in the Bible story room, where you're actually going to sing the song and tell the story, memorize the Bible verse. And you've got each group starting in a separate place, and you've got a team. Some of your volunteers are manning each of those stations, and then every 20 minutes or so you're moving all the kids to the next section, and so they're rotating around. But you've kind of divided up the group, and it's a little more age appropriate. So the song you sing for the little guys might not be the same song you sing for the older kids, right? And the activity, the craft that you do for the little guys may not be the same as the craft for the oldest kids. We find internationally the craft can be about the same. The little guys just need a little more help. But the oldest kids will take their time. They'll do a really intricate job. No matter what the craft is, they take it very seriously. It's so different than our culture. So just kind of think about how the flow of the morning will go. You can do them all together with mixed age groups, so you can separate them out. But you get to design this program. So I would say with your team, kind of sit down and go through that little worksheet and kind of say, here are all the things we can do. And then with the team, assign different responsibilities. Why don't you do the skit? Why don't you two work on the song? Why don't you guys work on the craft? You do some games, some review games or some activity games. And we each have responsibilities. And we work on that all together. And then when we go, everybody does their part. And it just kind of flows and works together. So I hope you'll use this as a simple outline structure for how to make a program for kids. And I'd love to know how it goes. So hope it helps, and we'll look for your comments.